All right, everybody, welcome back to the FitPro Show. Emily here, as always, in Fort Collins. My partner David is actually in Cancun getting married this weekend. So if you know him, send him a little congratulations email and wish him the best of luck. But replacing him, I have Jason Tagle from San Diego. We
Hello.
love having Jason on. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and replacing David for us for the next 2 weeks, actually. So Jason will be on this week and next week. And I think we're going to have kind of a two-part series conversation starting today, and then we'll go into it to finish it off next week. So last week, David and I talked a little bit about fat loss. And Jason was on, and this is how we kind of came up with this topic. We didn't dive too deep into all of the subjects that we kind of had talked about. And so some of those, were just weight loss in general, right? And kind of like that measuring progress. We talked a little bit about BMI. We talked about food intake. And kind of that calorie deficit that you need to have, not only through food, but also exercise. And so we also kind of discussed weight loss is it's not a linear process. And so I think that would be kind of the best way to kind of start this conversation is kind of diving
Sure.
into those three topics. And then we have a little bit more that we want to go on, but it's Jason and I were talking to how quick time goes. So
It does.
I think we should start there
Yeah,
and we'll just see where it goes. So Jason, for you, I know we talked a little bit about measuring progress when it comes to weight loss. What are kind of the things that you utilize when, trying to either for yourself or clients?
sure. And by the way, I have some alcohol-free beer. So if you see me take a sip, that's what that is. Very good. It's by
Alcohol-free
Suntory.
beer.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Huh.
So
Interesting.
yeah,
I
you and
have
David.
coffee.
Yeah, always a go-to. So, you talked about the body mass index last week, and early on in my career, I always questioned why are we still using body mass index? Because it's your
Same.
weight relative to your height, right? So that's something I
Right.
always questioned. The reality is the medical community still uses BMI or body mass index, which is just your weight relative to your height as a risk factor or potential risk factor for other disease and for life expectancy. So it's not something we totally want to ignore. And I've done at least 1,000 body composition tests in my life, mainly the skin fold, the caliper measurements. So that gives you a more specific picture of
Definitely.
what your body is actually comprised of in terms of muscle and fat. So that's the two compartment model. My opinion, I think the ideal test, which we actually had on site in San Diego one year, was the DEXA, which is essentially it's an
Mm.
X-ray. What I like about it is that you don't really do much. You really just lie down and the machine scans you. And then what I like is you get a three compartment model. So you get your muscle, fat, and bone density. So I think that's
Oh.
one of the big values of that test, right? Is
Mhm.
getting that bone density so that if you have a low bone density, maybe it's something you can work on in terms of either nutritionally or a combination of nutrition and exercise. But I think that gives you a really accurate picture. The bottom line is, although body composition is more targeted and specific compared to body mass index, it's not something that we can practically rely on regularly. And you have to trust that the person measuring you, like if they're doing the skin fold measurements, is someone who's experienced and it's going to be precise from measure to measure. So if anything, if you have access to a method like that, maybe try to get it from the same person so that it's consistent from measure to measure. And I think the real value with the body composition measurements is tracking your progress over time. Would you agree with that, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to touch on the whole skin fold stuff first. I think exactly right. So we had talked, David and I last week about how BMI is just ridiculous and we hate using it. But yeah, if you do want those specific accurate measurements, definitely go get a skin fold test. little keynote before you go in. It might be a little weird. They're going to be pinching and pulling your skin, but it's not something that's really going to hurt you. But just to give you a little forewarning if you've never done it before. But like Jason said, it's one of the best accurate ones that you can get. And then what he was talking about, what was the one that you utilized? I'm
Oh
trying to think
yeah,
of
the DEXA. It's like a
the
dual
DEXA.
X-ray.
Yeah. I went to like an exposium in Chicago, and there was a bunch of companies trying to sell theirs very similar to that. And I went in one and it was just standing there and it just took a scan of my body. It was so cool. You walked out and you just saw everything, like everything that you wanted to know. It was right there on the screen, and they explained it to you. So yeah, that's probably the most precise, and you get more out of that. You get to find out, like Jason said, the bone density, the body fat, the muscle mass, all that stuff. So it's very interesting if you've never done one before. Jason, how do you feel about the handheld ones? I
Oh,
know David.
bioelectrical impedance. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know
Um,
with that, it's another easy access one. Like you can go into most commercial gyms and they would have some variation of that.
yeah.
What I notice is that your fluid levels can really throw it off because
I
your
was just
fluid
gonna say that.
level would count as, yeah, your lean body mass. So that
Yeah.
can,
When I worked at like a commercial gym right when I got out of college, and that's what we utilized. And I preferably went out and got my own calipers and was like, no, we're just gonna do skin folds because I didn't like it. The accuracy on it wasn't consistent. So just be sure that, if you are utilizing one, there's new batteries in it and that it's not so old too. But like Jason said too, when you're doing the skin fold measurements, just make sure you're doing it with somebody. Like, you can't have your husband go and do it. You gotta have somebody that's experienced and knows what they're doing. So yeah, great points. And then what was the question you asked? I'm sorry, totally
oh
went on
yeah,
a
no,
tangent.
I mean, in terms of the skin fold, I mean, we trained to do this. We needed to be certified. So it's not just something that you can buy the device and then just use it. We were trained, we had a lot of practice before we actually
Yep.
started doing it in the real world.
Right.
Um, So, I mean, well, I do want to just go back to body mass index because my fear is that someone might go for health screening, for example, and they see that they have a high BMI. So they might be in that overweight, even obese category. And a lot of
Mhm.
people use the excuse that, well, I'm lifting weights 3 times a week, so it's probably mostly muscle. So, and muscle is more dense than fat. So although I'm overweight and maybe even bordering on obese, I'm sure it's all muscle. And if you kind of observe that realistically, what if they're just, they're weight training, but 2/3 of that time is cracking jokes with their workout partner and it's chest day 3 times a week?
Right.
I mean, how much muscle do you really have? And that's where we go to body composition as a way to
Yep.
really target it more specifically. But there is another tool that you can use easily at home that would give you a more accurate picture if you're concerned about your body mass index, and that's your waist measurement. So with the waist measurement, you can't really use clothes or fashion to determine what your actual waist measurement is, because if you go to buy a pair of jeans or chinos and then you get the pant size measured by waist and inseam, depending on the rise of the pant, you're not quite sure if it's measured according to the waist measurement or closer to the hip. So although you might know kind of your pant size range, it doesn't necessarily correlate with your actual waist circumference. So what I would recommend is getting a tape measure. And this is not going to be like the type of tape measure that you would use when you're doing projects. That's kind of like that stiff type. You would need more of a tailor's tape measure that's more softer, like cloth that you can wrap around. And you would want to wrap it around your umbilicus or your navel or belly button. So just kind of wrap it around, make sure it's lying flat, and then get that measure, of course, in inches. Ideally, first thing in the morning before you've eaten anything, standing up, don't try to suck in, just relax, just breathe out, and then just measure your waist. And it's determined that you're at a high risk for male if your waist circumference is 40 inches or above. And for female, that would be 35 inches or above would be deemed high risk. Now, you're actually probably going to want to be even lower than that to be more optimal health. So For low risk, the recommendation is 37 inches or less for male, 31.5 inches or less for female. And what I like about waist measurement is that it's not really something you can fake, meaning you're not going to tell me that, oh, well, I have a 40-inch waist, but I've been doing a lot of deadlifts, so I'm sure my core is just super muscular. It's not happening. So waist measurement, in addition to body mass index, is probably going to get you closer to knowing more of what your actual body composition is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an easy way to measure it. I remember when COVID had just happened, I was working with some clients and they're like, I don't even have a scale. I can't go get one. I don't know how to measure it. And I was like, do you have a tape measure? And they're like, the one that you were talking about, the flexible one. They're like, no. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you have a piece of string, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, take that piece of string, line it up, then go take it to your other tape measure, size
there we
it out,
go.
and figure out what it is. So another different way, if you don't want to go out and buy one, you don't necessarily have to. You could take your belt or whatever it is, something simple, and then go measure that. But yeah, that's such a great point where it's like, yeah, you might feel limited right now, but there are ways around that to, one, figure out a baseline of where you're at, and then try and track it throughout, your journey. So yeah, super, super great tips. When and if, I know things were easing up for a little while and I was starting to do some doctor's appointments as well. So if you're there, ask them for these numbers and they'll help you figure it out. It doesn't have to be inside of a gym. If you're just going to get an annual checkup, I'm sure they're going to be talking about that and ask questions. So awesome. Great tips.
Yeah, and for us, for our health incentive program, our employee wellness program, the waist measurement is one of the things that we get recorded along with body mass index, cholesterol, triglycerides, all those screenings. So the waist measurement is an important thing to watch after. And you know what? Look in the mirror. I mean, I know there's nothing more uncomfortable than listening to your recorded voice and standing in front of the bathroom mirror naked. But just take a visual assessment. Is your waist wider than the hip bone? Which that's another actual measure that you can do, is your waist to hip circumference. And those numbers are, so what we're doing is we're comparing our waist circumference divided by our hip circumference, which is kind of that bony protrusion. Sorry, I'm kind of low here, but kind of where you feel those bones. I know it can get kind of clouded if there's some extra padding there, but where those bones protrude, that's going to be your hip circumference. And for male, you want that number 0.95 or below, meaning your waist is 0.95 of your hip circumference. And then for female, that number is going to be 0.85. So 0.95, 0.85, so your waist compared to your hip. So you just want your waist circumference just slightly smaller than your hip circumference. And abdominal adiposity, meaning storing more fat around the midsection, is correlated with increased health risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point there. Just another easy thing that you can do while you're at home and you don't have access to us or, another person that could do that. So yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, so I think that covers just measuring progress. I think we can get into actually what to do about it. So this, you said this last week, which was a calorie deficit. So a calorie deficit is your primary stimulus or driver for weight loss, meaning excess weight loss, fat loss. It's really going to be a combination of different tissue, but mainly fat loss. And what a calorie deficit means is you have a certain amount of energy in the form of calories that you expend per day. And if you're eating just around that amount, you're maintaining your weight. So if you've been maintaining a certain weight and body composition throughout your adult life, it means you're kind of matching those two values, those two numbers. So if you go slightly lower in your calorie intake, where your expenditure stays at a given amount or even higher, it's the difference between those two that's the calorie deficit, meaning whatever you're not getting from food has to be made up from your stores of energy, which is going to be a combination of glycogen, which is the carbohydrate in your muscle, some amino acids from muscle, but mainly from your fat stores. And that's why our body stores fat, is to be used for energy for later. And so think of it like a savings account. If you have enough money in your checking account, you have enough funds, meaning you're feeding yourself enough, there's no real reason to dip into your savings account, which is your fat balance or your fat tissue stores. So only when you get to that point of being in a calorie deficit are you going to actually release fat from your fat stores. And I know that's like, it seems so simple and elementary, but a lot of diets will sell you on the fact that as long as you eat a certain way, you can eat as much as you want and you're still going to lose weight, still going to lose body fat. But the reality is, even with things like a ketogenic diet, which is a very low carbohydrate diet, you still need to be in a calorie deficit in order to release those fat stores. Because if you're just eating enough or too much, even though you're on a low carbohydrate diet, you're probably still getting enough fuel from the fats, the dietary fats in your food. So you're still fueling yourself enough. So you need that calorie deficit. And I'm glad you said this last week too, Emily, is that it doesn't have to be a severe deficit, meaning you don't have to really deprive yourself severely. It's just that slight deficit that you sustain for a long period of time. And the way you know that you're in a calorie deficit is you feel like you can eat more by the end of the day, but you choose not to because you have this goal of getting leaner. And on the opposite extreme, the way you know your calories are potentially too low is your body temperature. You're going to be cold all the time, no matter what the weather is, because your body is just not producing that heat, which is called thermogenesis.
Yeah. First of all, you explained that perfectly. I hope everybody understood that from Jason's explanation, because it's spot on and it was very concise. So one thing that I love too that you were talking about is the whole like cheat meal thing, or, it doesn't mean that you can just eat whatever you want.
Right.
I love that you mentioned that, because it's just like, people will be like, oh, well, I'm on this diet, so I can eat this because I'm on this diet. And it's like, well, are you still trying to go for fat loss? Because if that's the case, you still have to be in that calorie deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that, especially someone who's new to it all and is just reading kind of the internet, because it can be it can be confusing for sure.
Oh yeah.
Which I want to throw in a little plug. And the best person to go and talk to all this is Jessica Green. So shout out to Jessica Green. We'll leave her email in the chat box if you haven't met with her and this is something you want to go and explore and learn more about. She is very knowledgeable, and so definitely go and speak to her.
And she's here. She's here on the
Oh,
meeting. Yep.
oh, cool. Hi, Jessica. Yeah, and we just had her on talking about more nutrition stuff a few weeks ago, but that was pretty broad. But if you want to get specific to you, definitely set up a meeting with Jessica. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add to that, because you definitely just took the icing on the cake with that.
All right. And you brought up something interesting there, was like having cheat meals within, like trying to target a calorie deficit, which next episode, I definitely want to go more in depth on cheat meals and defining that and when you could maybe use those to your advantage. But let's say you determine a calorie intake level that is going to put you in a deficit. So some dietary philosophies out there suggest that, well, as long as you're in a calorie deficit, you can eat whatever you want within that calorie amount. So yes, that'll work in terms of weight loss, meaning you can eat M&Ms all day, and as long as you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. However, I don't think any of us
Nutritional
recommend that.
value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nutritional value,
Think
hormones,
about that.
appetite
Yeah.
control, what energy level, mental focus, those things all
Hmm.
play a role. And I will tell you
Yeah.
that the two major ones are low carb or low fat, some combination of those two, somewhere in between those. And you kind of have to play with those two variables. They both work. It's more of a matter of what works for you. And this is another good reason why you plug Jessica, because she can help you determine that. But eating whatever you want within the calorie intake that's going to put you in the deficit. I mean, there's other factors to consider, right? Because I can go on an ultra low fat diet and probably lose weight quickly, but I know my appetite's going to be through the roof. I'm not going to have that satiety. I'm not going to have that sustained mental focus where I could feel like I can go for long periods without having to snack. And then also my skin's probably going to get real dry. So I don't necessarily want to be lean, but have those side effects. So we still want to pay attention to nutrition quality, not only because we want to avoid those side effects, but it's going to help you sustain your rate of weight loss. And in fact, I worked with a nutritionist at one point in my life where I asked him, is it better if I overeat what we would consider like the healthy foods like chicken and broccoli? Is it better if I eat those and go with a calorie surplus? Or if I eat candy bars but stay under my calorie maintenance level, meaning creating a deficit? And he said the candy bars. However, the asterisk to that is, can you really only eat like just that small amount? Meaning having just a taste of those highly palatable foods are always going to lead to more. You'd have to have just really strong willpower to keep yourself at that certain level, because those kind of foods just create more cravings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's such a good point. And I love that you say that, because talking to some people at sometimes it's like, okay, well, what does your, diet look like right now? And like, well, I have one big meal and then I have like a couple snacks. And we'll talk about what the snacks are. And it's like, candy bars and whatever. They're like, well, I have no energy and I don't want to drink coffee in the middle of the day, so I snack on some candy bars. And it's like, well, you're not really thinking about what that's going to do for you in the long run if you're not actually having nutrient dense food in you. It's just sugar.
Yeah.
Then, like you said, it's going to make you crave more and more and more. And I'm sure we've all witnessed that at one point. I know I have, around Halloween time for sure.
My favorite time.
Yeah.
All right, Christy asked about the putting the numbers. Yeah, Christy, if you're going to be around like the last 5 minutes, I'll put those numbers in about the waist and the hip measurement. And just going into diet, nutrition a little more, the first place I would start is removing as much fluff from your diet as much as possible. Meaning, I know what these are. These are the highly palatable, mostly processed foods, very calorically dense. Things like your common snack foods. Just kind of picture like, how easy is it to eat an entire party-sized bag of chips that's like the flavor you like, the type you like, versus like if you were to try to eat the similar amount in potatoes. You'd probably get uncomfortable trying to eat the same amount in the form of whole potatoes versus like the chips. And then so other ones are like the candy and the highly processed foods. Even sometimes if they're promoted as health foods, like certain crackers, for example, they might be, just almost the same caloric density as your potato chips, and then high fat processed carb, not as satisfying as just having a basic home cooked meal. And there's actually one food product which I'm going to have everyone guess here, that I don't recommend anyone consume, especially children. And I'll give you a hint, it has no fat in it.
Sugar.
Sugar? Red Bull?
Soda.
Pretty close. Yeah, so pretzel. Ooh, love pretzel. Not pretzel though, but it's actually soft drink, pop, soda, Coke, however you
Soda
call
pop.
it.
Yeah, so many
Yeah,
people
soda
call
pop.
it
And the reason why is like it has all the elements that put you at a disadvantage in terms of actually sustaining a healthy weight. Because number one, it's easy to consume. It's liquid. It doesn't have to be processed by your stomach. It just goes straight to your small intestine. It's very high in sugar. So for example, the recommendation in terms of number of teaspoons of added sugar per day is about 6 teaspoons. And a can of Coke is going to give you, Jessica, I don't have the numbers in my head right now, but I think it's pretty darn close to that amount. Like you can get almost your entire daily sugar intake from one can of Coke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you look at your teaspoon. So if you're ever curious about that, so if you look at your labels and it'll say includes 40 grams of added sugars, divide that number by 4, and that'll be the number of teaspoons. So
There you
as Jason mentioned, the 6 teaspoons is what the American Heart Association recommends. The American Dietary Guidelines recommends about 10% of your calories coming from those added sugars, which equates to about 12 teaspoons. Regardless, a can of soda, a can of Coke, Sprite, whatever, is going to far exceed that. And we also have just going to throw in there, when we start talking about soda, we start talking about dental caries, as well as it can do some havoc on your GI system. So if we're dealing with constipation, gas, or any issues that happen above the belly button in our GI system, that excess carbon dioxide, as well as when we're drinking it, we tend to inhale a little bit more. That can add some irritation to our upper GI.
Great insights. I just learned the divide by 4. Now I know, because I always look and I'm like, I'm not really sure. But I always try and stay away from that stuff as much as I can. But yeah, thanks for that, Jessica. That's a really good tip, super easy to, and like you said, look at the labels. We talked about that a few episodes ago, how easy it is now to kind of see those labels and what everything looks like. Jason, I love the fact of, bringing up those snacks and stuff. And I think, what would be beneficial is, try new things, whether it's, different fruits and vegetables, and figure out what you do like and what you don't like. And when you're at the store, try and pick those up instead of those snacks and keep them in your house, because you're only going to eat what's in your house, right? So if you're picking up the snacks and you have them in your house, you're gonna eat them eventually. So, try and pick those snacks that are, more nutrient dense and, something that you actually like as well. And like I had mentioned before, try new things, because you might try something that you really love that you're like never would have tried before.
Very good point. Yeah, make it convenient. And that's actually a good segue. I want to continue off that point next time. Emily,
Okay.
you were totally right. This went by too fast, but I do want to address something. So we're going to talk about planning. I want to talk about cardio or / exercise, cheat meals, and then how to get past those weight loss plateaus. Jenny asked, is the soda pop soft drink thing true of mineral waters such as LaCroix? And absolutely not. I don't know the ingredients in LaCroix, but I think it's just maybe at most it's fruit sugar, but like mostly mineral water. So I'm thinking it's probably less than, I don't know,
So,
like a very low percentage.
Yeah,
oh, GI
so for the
issues. Sorry
GI
about
issues, it can, depending on your system.
Oh, okay.
It can, you can kind of test that out and do just it's the non-carbonation mineral waters, flavor it yourself and see if you experience GI issues compared
Okay.
to your LaCroix of the world.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then so I'm just going to just type in the waist measurements here.
Yeah, and if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to either unmute or throw them in the chat box. We've got about probably another 40 seconds or so, but this was a great conversation. Like
Emily,
I said, yeah.
Emily, can I take about 10 seconds really
Go
quick?
for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Only because Jason did a fantastic job talking about that calorie deficit. And one thing I want to just highlight, and I put in the chat box, myplate.gov, if you're curious about your calorie and your calorie goals, be mindful that one pitfall that tends to happen, which tends to also induce that plateau, which tend to also induce that another round trip around that diet cycle, is sometimes we cut our calories too low, too fast. So we go from one extreme to another. And I'm pretty sure Jason will touch upon this when you start talking about tracking and recording, but we want to slow and steady wins the race when it comes to weight loss. And I know that's not fun to hear all the time, but we want to make sure that we're not going, from 2000 to 1200, for instance, or whatnot. We then start to trigger some very serious biochemical reactions happening in the hypothalamus as well as in our prefrontal cortex, where we start triggering wanting to the body's defense mechanisms against weight loss. Because remember, our body's always working against us in weight loss because it wants to survive. So don't go too low on your calories.
I have a
Absolutely.
question for Jessica related to what you said now. And
Yeah,
when
go for it.
I click on that link, I went there, I put all my data, and it says I should be eating less than 2,200. How much low should you go? What is that reasonable amount of calories, that the calorie deficit? Is it 200, 500, 20?
Yeah, Xavier, there's no specific amount. Most people are going to recommend 500 less. I think that's quite a bit. You can even start more conservatively, so like 200 or 300 less. The main thing is going to be measuring your progress. So if that's your weight or a combination of your weight and waist, the main goal is the least or the lowest calorie deficit, meaning the smallest calorie deficit that's going to allow you to get results.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would definitely, yeah, like Jason said, start, be a little easier on yourself to start with and see how you feel, like energy levels and everything like that too.
Yeah, and also look
and
for
just
those
kinda
high
gauge that.
calorie, those
But
high
great-
calorie
great
things.
question.
You mean high calorie foods, Jessica?
Yeah, can y'all hear me? I'm
No,
having all
it's
kinds of
we got
IT issues. I'm sorry. There's all
No,
kinds
you're
of
there.
drama going with my computer and headset. No, I was gonna say look for those high calorie ones. The high calorie ticket items, for instance, a tall vanilla latte from Starbucks is about 400 calories, right? So we start, chipping away at those types of calories first and foremost, then we can kind of start getting into the nitty gritties. So yeah, typically you will hear recommendations anywhere from 500 calories so that way you're getting about 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week. I think that anything above 500 calorie deficit needs to be monitored by a professional, by a nutrition professional, because then we start getting into more serious deficits. But starting at that 250, kind of going between 250 to 500, that might be a way to go. But also, like Jason said, look at other parameters, look at your waist, look at how you feel. How is your bowels moving? I know that's not very exciting to talk about, but how are your bowels moving? How's your hair doing, etc.
Yeah, great question, great answer. Thanks for that, Jessica.
Xavier?
Yeah. All right, everybody. We are a little bit over time, but thanks for staying on. It's been, like Jason and I said, we feel like we could turn this into like a 2-hour talk, but that's why we have next week. So we will continue on the conversation next week, same place, same time, and we'll hope to see you there. If you have any more questions and you want to reach out to any of us personally, feel free to, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, Jason and Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Bye, everyone.